Psychologists of Reddit, what was the most disturbing story you have ever heard? I'm not a psychologist, but my friend is. She told me about a patient of hers who was HIV positive and a paranoid schizophrenic. He thought that the nurses who worked at the hospital he was in were trying to kill him, so he would frequently bite his tongue and spit HIV positive blood into their faces' mouths. When they had to come into contact with him, they were required to wear full masks and gloves. I had a client with intellectual deficits that stimulates her optic nerve manually by pushing her finger into her eye socket and touching it. The medical doctor that helped with the situation said the action causes an endorphin rush that she was addicted to. Luckily, through some pretty dedicated behavioral therapy, she no longer does it. Pretty messed up when it was happening though. Dear God, this made me cringe like nothing else in this thread. I'm in grad school now for psychology and counseling. One of my professors told the story of a former client who was severely depressed, but had no suicidal ideation. His brother and father both committed suicide and he refused to do that to his family. However, he constantly imagined killing his wife. They had a happy marriage, never fought, etc. She was so compassionate and comforting, knowing his mental state, but he couldn't stop thinking about killing her. My professor made him talk through the act of killing her, closing his eyes and describe every detail, and he said the guy just broke down and sobbed uncontrollably. He felt so horrible. He knew it was so wrong and truly didn't want to hurt her, but he couldn't stop his thoughts. He was diagnosed, along with 3 or 4 other disorders, with OCD because he was obsessed with the thought of killing his wife. This story sticks with me since I always thought of OCD as people who are obsessed with certain actions, etc., not thoughts or ideas. My mom used to be an advocate for children with mental disabilities. She had been assigned a new family that month, and they seemed pretty normal. Both parents checked out, and the kid was about 10 years old. He had a moderate case of autism and schizophrenia. The family also had a dog for the kid to play with. When the dog died, the parents decided to let the kid keep playing with it. No, they didn't stuff it. The kid played with the dead dog for a couple weeks before my mom realized what was going on. The kid would even sleep with the dog at night. TLDR. An autistic child played and slept with a dead dog. I had a psych prof a few years back which liked to give a lot of clinical examples. One of these actually made me say what the frick. Basically, a girl who was a gang hangaround for a few years decided she wanted out. This did not go well with them and they threatened her, and her brother got in the middle of it. Eventually, they showed up at her house and kidnapped her and her brother. They ended up hanging her brother in a closet with a coat hanger and raping her with a hot curling iron. Till when leaving the gang, kill the gang. I have a degree in psychology, but I'm working in a different field of healthcare currently. I think the most disturbing that a professor ever told me about was a patient who she believed actually did have dissociative identity disorder, aka multiple personality disorder. The woman was from a war-torn country and had been raped and tortured as a sex slave for years before being rescued and brought to America. Most of the time she was totally normal, but situations that reminded her of her home country or caused great stress sent her into the other personalities. One was an aggressive soldier, one was a terrified child, and one was a hypersexual young woman. She had landed herself in jail due to both the aggressive soldier, in which she was convinced she was a man, and the hypersexual woman, in which she attempted to prostitute herself. I believe my professor was writing a case study on her. She had a service dog that was trained to alert her family if she was getting stressed or anxious so they could make sure she was somewhere safe, home or hospital, if she dissociated. Not a psychologist, but I worked in a group home for boys once. The staff recommended I hold off reading their files for a few weeks so I could get to know them first. When I did read one boy's file, I regretted it right away. He had been given up at birth because his mom was an alcoholic and drug addict. He had FASD, passed around a few foster homes until he settled at one around 5 years old, but the husband was sexually abusing him. Cass let him stay with the wife after she kicked the husband out, but when she found the boy having sex with the dog she called Cass and he was sent to the group home. Cute boy, 8 years old when I met him but with the intellectual capacity of a 3-year-old. Wish I could have helped him more. She found the boy having sex with the dog, 8 years old when I met him. Dang. Psych tech here, and it has to be the few child fetish people I have met. They typically lead normal lives and have a compulsion that can't be stopped, and when they get caught, they enter a state of pure self-destruction. It's the worst depression and suicidal ideation I've ever seen. We have to keep them in seclusion with absolutely nothing, not even a cloth gown, or they will attempt. I spent 95% of my teenage life incarcerated, from juvenile hall to youth authority, basically prison for minors. The young girls that I encountered have had some serious issues. I became very close with this one girl at the time. She was 13. She was raised by her father and 5 brothers. Her father and all but one of her brothers would constantly rape her. She even mentioned her uncle doing it as well. It was the main reason she wanted to be in lockup. It was the only way she could get away without telling on them. No matter what, she would never tell on them. It was the worst thing I ever heard. She never told anyone but me. We both just cried for a while as we confided in each other our darkest secrets. I'm not a psychologist. I did spend 5 months in a treatment center where we had to share our stories. The worst I heard, and really they were all the worst. But there are 2 that stick out the most. I'll share one due to the length. I'm not using many details to protect her privacy, but here goes. A young girl is living with her mother and father. Her only recollection of her father is that he was super nice to her, but mean to her mom. One day, after her dad was particularly mean to her mom, they packed all of their stuff and left her childhood home to live with her mother's sister. This next detail was first brought up years after the end of the story. Her mother would stay up late at night worried for her life and the life of her children. She sat down with her sister at some point and said, "He's going to kill me. I know he will. I want you to take care of my kids when he does." Imagine hearing that all those years later, knowing your mother knew she would die and didn't do anything to stop it. This girl had a brother and a sister, and one day on the way to her little brother's baseball practice, a large truck started following them. Her father was driving. He began to rear-end the car, attempting to run them off the road. This was on a residential street. Eventually the car was rammed into a tree. Her mother told the oldest daughter, the person I was in treatment with, to grab her cell phone and call 911, but she couldn't find the phone, so they got out of the car. At this point her father climbed out of his car and drew his gun. He shot and killed her mother and brother and then aimed the gun at her. He shot her in the shoulder, and before she lost consciousness she told her younger sister to play dead. The whole family was rushed to the hospital and the 2 girls were the only survivors. After he was arrested, he didn't kill himself and he wasn't shot by police. They found a note in his car. It said something along the lines of, "I love them so much. If I can't have them, nobody can." He is now awaiting the death penalty and she testifies every time he files for an appeal. For me, it isn't just one story, but the overwhelming amount of terrible parents that rent out their children to people from the neighborhood for money. A lot of women I work with have been raped multiple times so that their parents could get money for food, drugs, or to pay the bills. What I cannot understand is how someone's thoughts become so desperate so quickly that they completely skip any sacrifice on their part and go straight to sacrifice from their children. I would rather sell my own body 1,000 times to pay the bills than ever consider asking someone in my care to do the same. It amazes me how low some people will sink. I worked for a residential treatment place for teens. They were committed to this against their will for a minimum of 6 months. Most had stories you wouldn't believe. The worst was a 13-year-old girl. She was very sweet but also very uneducated. She had never been to school. Her mother left, I think, when she was very small. The dad beat her and her brother regularly. She was also having sex with her brother. She got pregnant. The dad took the infant at birth out into the woods and killed it, then brought back a bucket of the blood and made her bathe in it. Her uncle was also molesting her. When the dad found out about it, he killed the uncle and himself in front of her. There are probably some other details I'm forgetting because it was a long time ago. That poor girl now bounces from institution to institution. And I'm out. Remember that psychologists are not only there for the extremely messed up, batshit insane people. No shame in going to a therapist or psychologist for depression. It is in fact always a very good idea to do. Don't be shy, nullify your problems or be afraid, please. Your problems can be solved. This is a great reminder in a thread like this. It's like going to a regular doctor. Most people go to get a bump checked out, not to remove the 100-pound tumor. Nothing wrong with doing a preventative mental health checkup every now and then too. I had a client once who was diagnosed with pretty severe schizoaffective disorder. She believed her house was haunted and would tell me in vivid detail about a woman with really thin stringy black hair without any eyes, just empty eye sockets. She said how she always saw her somewhere in the distance, getting closer. One night she stated that she woke up and the woman was staring at her, smiling this really wide smile in the corner of her room. Then she started whispering to her to kill herself over and over. She also claimed that next morning she woke up and there was a kitchen knife on her nightstand that she had no recollection of placing there. That was pretty chilling to hear. In one of our sessions she started screaming and crying, claiming that the woman was right behind me. She also thought the woman stabbed me in the head during this session and I was bleeding profusely. It was certainly hard to sleep after that. This happening to me is one of my biggest fears in life. This probably won't get read, but here's mine. I am a case manager in a prison, and one of my sickest offenders I have had to work with was not all there mentally. He sexually molested his own 2 daughters, the oldest from when she was 6 until she hit 12 and had her first period, the second from when she was 3 until he was caught. He would rape them vaginally and anally, and if they tensed up he would beat them. He went as far as to build a rape room out of shag carpet to soundproof it. The mom knew what was happening and didn't say anything until he beat her so bad the neighbors called the cops. According to the report, she walked in on him with the youngest while forcing the oldest to watch. When I interviewed him about it, he justified it by saying they were his property. He also told me how his daughters seduced him and had flirted with him since they were infants. After the assessment I sat in the bathroom and tried to find my soul. I studied psychology but never worked in that field. I do volunteer at a suicide hotline though, and you hear some messed up things from callers, necrophilia and the like. I'm not qualified yet, that takes a doctorate, but one of our case studies in college about a woman with a dependent personality disorder was pretty bad. She had been a patient of our professor and he featured her in his clinical psychology book, without names or location, obviously. Her husband was sexually abusing her daughter, but she just didn't want to leave him. It's difficult to comprehend how skewed priorities have to be there. I may be wrong, but aren't doctors supposed to call the cops if a crime is reported or discussed in a session, especially if the crime is against a child? I work as a group therapist in a safety net inpatient hospital wing. There are literally thousands of stories I could tell, but in the interest of confidentiality I will just share one my professor told me about her client back when I was in grad school. This guy was volunteering in a seedy part of town, and as he was going to drop off some donation items he got targeted for a gang initiation. Several large men jumped him, stole his car and all his donation items, and then anally raped him. One or several of the men who raped him had HIV and passed it on to him. So to recap, he got the crap beat out of him, all his stuff stolen, and then raped and given HIV, all while he was trying to do some good in the world. I used to work for a children's youth group. There was a little girl there who was so sweet but was missing most of her fingers on her right hand and her thumb was mangled. When I found out what her story was, I was horrified. Mom had checked out early on, major drug addict, and kids were left with dad who was a borderline alcoholic with a bad temper. Well, one day when she was out with her dad, she was 3 at the time, she started throwing a temper tantrum over something. Dad got angrier and angrier, and when they got to their car, Dad grabbed the girl by the arm and proceeded to smash her hand between the car and the car door. Cops were called obviously. Girl went into foster care for a bit. Dad spent only 3 months in jail and had to attend anger management parenting classes. The girl was back with her dad fairly soon and lived in fear of him ever since. A client with mild but visible physical disabilities due to being the product of incest. The mother had them too. There was a lineage of incest in the family. The grandfather molested him too, along with everyone else in the family, and he then became an abuser to his younger cousins. It's very difficult to rehome kids with sexually inappropriate behaviors, so after he was released from court-mandated treatment, guess where he went? Right back home. I had another client with a very low, but functional IQ. He could, with lots of help, live semi-independently and hold down a basic job when he got older. However, his mom was extremely low IQ. She had been raped repeatedly in group home environments. He was the product of one such rape, so she was put into an apartment. Multiple assessments showed she did not have the capacity to be a mother. Despite the fact that she loved this kid, she was happy to give him up. He was unattractive and had severe developmental delays, even considering his IQ, due to living in an inappropriate environment. The court deemed time and time again that it was best to keep the bio family together and sent him home over and over. His entire life was cycling in and out of services. Frick those police that ignored your warnings. Keep fighting the good fight. I've had several clients with disturbing stories, but what really gets to me as a therapist is when I need to hospitalize a client. It's actually part of the job. If you come in and tell me you are going to kill yourself, I have to have the police come get you and transport you to a locked inpatient facility. Sometimes this happens easily. The client knows it's the best thing for them and goes willingly. Sometimes it's less easy. The client rages, may or may not threaten me, and eventually flees, only to have the cops pull him or her over and transport the client to the hospital in the back of a squad car. Whatever way it happens, I will never get over that feeling of complete and utter sadness of watching someone I care about, yes, good therapists actually care about their clients, go into the hospital. I'm not sad because they went in, but because they so easily could have lied to me and gone home and taken their own lives. I'm lucky enough to have not experienced that, but I know if I keep practicing then I probably will. So I guess the disturbing story is mine. I know that for all the work we do together and as well as some people might seem to be feeling, anyone I meet with might choose to kill themselves, and I may not be able to get them enough help first. Was in treatment last month, an adolescent place, residential long-term treatment, and met a few strange stories. One young girl, 10yo, had a newborn sister who was getting more attention from her mother than she had and so attempted to kill the baby for her mother's love. Another was adopted into a huge family, 11yo, and constantly tried to strangle other children before she came to treatment, claiming that voices told her to. She constantly saw things and reported hearing threats, but I don't think she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She also had horrible panic attacks where she would stiffen and have tremors as if she were possessed. I've never seen panic attacks play out as horrible as they did for her. A few more I wouldn't be able to tell in depth, but from what bits and pieces I have, every person there had a pretty messed up story. A colleague, female therapist, was doing an assessment of a 4-year-old girl and halfway through the session my colleague noticed the girl had been scratching at her privates. She asked her why. The little girl proceeded to say it itches and hurt from the pen. More clarifying questions later the girl exposed her pubis mound showing a semi-fresh tattoo. Needless to say, police were called. Mom's boyfriend arrested girl in foster care. Summation: horrible parents got a real tattoo on their 4-year-old daughter's pubis mound. Don't know who did the tattoo, assuming it was the boyfriend of the mother. I used to work as a counselor for adolescents who were required to attend therapy by the court. One that stands out was a boy who had issues with his mother as far as her paying more attention to her dogs than to him, among other things. One day they found out the son had sex with one of the dogs and it later died. He was an interesting kid, but the entire family dynamic was pretty creepy. Colby, 2015. I once had a child client who had recently been removed from his home. As is fairly common when a child has just been removed, he was very protective of his mom and said she was the best mom ever. It turned out his mother was a prostitute who went out at night to work and he would follow her and hide in the bushes to make sure when she was okay. And when she occasionally worked at home, some of the Johns would babysit him. My mom used to do shifts in the psych ward at the hospital. She once had someone describe in detail to her how he had sex with a fly. Another injected vinegar in their eye with a syringe to kill the alien that was living there. My father is a psychologist. He had to testify once in court regarding a particularly upsetting case in which a mother put her young son in the oven, cooked him and ate him. Of all the ones I've read, this one right here just kills me. Not mine, but when my cousin worked in a mental institution, she came home one day and found one of her patients in her garden. A schizophrenic patient, not mine, who was about 16 years old. He'd been having delusions and hallucinations. He thought that every time he masturbated his semen would travel backwards and into his spine, which would allow the devil to control him and make him harm those he loved. As far as I'm aware, he only harmed himself, but for obvious reasons he was placed in a ward. Very specific in what he thought would happen. That is strange. My supervisor specializes in homelessness, and I've heard quite a lot of stories about how they became homeless. I remember her telling me that the first homeless men she ever interviewed took to the streets when he was 16 because he was constantly raped by people in his family. His only escape is drinking alcohol, but because we have laws against drinking in public, he is always harassed by the police. Restaurants and bars won't let him in. He has no home to go to. Where else can he drink but on the streets? I know this story might not be as disturbing as the other ones on this thread, but there is such a social stigma against homelessness, I thought I'd share this to change a few minds about it. I've also heard stories about how schizophrenics were treated in the past which were horrific, but I'm not doing clinical psychology, so I don't really have the expertise to go into too much details about it. Feel free to ask me about social or organizational psych related stuff though. Schizophrenics are still treated pretty horribly. Would have to be a 14-year-old on probation. He had violated for failing a random UA4MUs. The kicker was that he got the M from his mom. They had been using it together. She showed up to one of his court hearings high on M. The most disturbing thing was that she put on a front of being a caring parent and would talk at length about how she wanted to help him straighten out his life. Lady was a complete psychopath. Kids never had a chance. Generally speaking though, there are a lot of CPS reports that I've had to review that I will never be able to unsee. It changes the way you view the world. Family Guy or South Park jokes about pedophiles that seemed hilarious in college are only dark because you know what people have actually done. It's also weird to just see all the normal looking families out in the community doing their thing. And it just seems bizarre to think that there are parents with children out there that not only don't do everything they can to keep them safe, they actively demolish any sense of safety for the rest of their lives. On the plus side, it really makes me appreciate my own upbringing. My parents beat themselves up about imperfections. My mom feels bad for imparting her anxieties. And my dad constantly apologizes for the handful of times he yelled at me when I was acting like a little idiot. They clothed me, fed me, hugged me, and told me they loved me every day. I get to walk through life with no trauma, have normal relationships, and feel safe in the world around me. I just smile and tell them they have no idea how fine of a job they did. It's horrible, depressing, painful stuff. If you're very empathetic and sensitive, you won't be able to handle reading some of this. You've been warned, though. This comment will probably float around the bottom, rendering it pointless. Social worker rather than psychologist, but here it goes. Baby with fetal alcohol syndrome gets given up for adoption and is adopted by a couple. At his first birthday party, the dad, who is in a wheelchair, gets angry at someone at the party and somehow gets a gun and shoots the guy. The bullet goes through the guy and into the mom, who falls into the kid's crib and bleeds out and dies in front of him. The kid is then adopted by a distant relative of the original adoptive dad, who apparently has little interest in raising him, because she is now only his mother in the loosest sense of the word. She refers to herself as his caregiver or something equivalent to that. This kid, a teenager now, loves her like a mother, and doesn't understand that she really never saw him as a son. He's in a residential setting and thinks he will eventually get to go home to live with mom, but this is never going to happen. I don't know that you will get a lot of first-hand stories here, since in America HIPAA laws would prevent a psychologist from divulging confidential information. Even if they posted it anonymously and removed most of the details, they could still lose their license if caught. In addition, people who seek treatment do so believing it will be held confidential, and an ethical psychologist would be strictly bound to uphold this. Not my story. My mom worked in mental institutions in her younger years and actually worked at a large, well-known asylum before it was shut down. There was one woman there that thought she was a vampire of sorts. She was only allowed out 1 hour a day, and they had to use safety precautions. She had already attacked and killed at least one hospital worker before these were enacted. When my mom asked about her, It was revealed that she had killed at least 2 of her children, wounded another as well as her husband because she had some sort of physical condition called porphyria, which apparently made her crave blood. By the time that they discovered there was something physically wrong with her, she already had lost her mind from guilt and grief. The poor job of de-identifying in some of these stories makes me hope the people in this thread are using the term psychologist loosely. This has ethical violation written all over it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.